Good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to the side event, Enhancing NDC Ambition through Article 6 Cooperation in Africa. I do apologize, we're slightly delayed. We're quite a bit delayed, I'm afraid, due to technical problems in Glasgow. But we're very pleased to welcome you to what we hope will be an interesting session. So we're talking really today about the key features of the initiative, the Nordic Initiative for Cooperative Approaches. This is a pan-Nordic effort which will look at how Article 6 cooperation can help to scale up mitigation activities and to promote sustainable development in Africa under the Paris Agreement. The workshop that we have, and we have some great speakers for you this morning, the workshop will present NICA's approach and the key principles for Article 6 piloting, and focus in particular on key opportunities for cooperation with host countries in Africa. We'll be presenting ongoing initiatives in the region with a view to accelerate the Article 6 implementation. The side event will also present the African perspectives on Article 6 piloting and highlight the importance of these activities for enhancing market readiness and institutional capacity within Africa. The experience of other donors that have had Article 6 activities will also be presented at the event. So I do apologize, we have been delayed somewhat, but as I say, we do have a good set of speakers with some really practical experience in this area. So first and foremost, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Kari Hemakowski. Kari is a senior program manager here at Nefco. He's got over 20 years of experience working with carbon and climate finance, and is currently working both on the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa, which is a large-scale energy access program we have run here at Nefco, and also the Nika, where he's supporting the operationalization of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. So with no further ado, I'll pass you on to Kari. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ash, very much, dear colleagues. It's my pleasure to present NICA very briefly before we go into more details with some other colleagues. Basically, if we can go to the next slide, please. Basically, NICA or Nika was established in 2018. That was based on the very good previous collaboration with various Nordic countries. And at the time, we were working on Peru, on waste sector, and Vietnam in cement sector. And as there was strong interest to continue sort of Nordic collaboration, of course, the aim was shifted towards Paris Agreement and especially Article 6. Because we have a lot in common in Nordic countries, and furthermore, there's extensive experience on Kyoto mechanisms in Nordic countries. So we can really draw on that experience and pilot Article 6 going forward. NICA is funded by Finland, Sweden, Norway, Nefco, and the Nordic Council of Ministers, and we have also other Nordic observers are sort of working together with us. And really the aim is to work on the Paris Agreement and especially Article 6. And of course, we need sort of more sectoral approaches going beyond the projects. We need to promote sustainable development, and gender is key for the Nordic countries. That's a key focus. And of course, the really key is the private sector. We definitely would need to see more private sector. And we believe that Article 6, like CDM did earlier, could really help to meet the Paris goals. Next one, please. So there are a lot of Nordic priorities for Paris Agreement Article 6. I only highlighted some here. There are a lot more, but clearly there are several documents, statements where all the Nordic countries are sort of enhancing climate activities, including carbon finance elements. Some countries are more advanced than other countries, and also some countries have a more bilateral activities, as we will hear from Arvid, for example, later this afternoon. And of course, again, I would like to highlight this role of private sector, that the carbon market could really help to to catalyze markets and really enhance the climate finance, or combining climate finance with carbon finance components. So that's something we are interested to really support as well. Next one, please. All the Nordic countries, all 5 Nordic countries, Norway, Finland, Iceland, Sweden, Denmark, they have very ambitious climate policies. Actually, all the countries have carbon neutrality targets from 2030 up to 2050. There's some variation. And also, countries have indicated there are slightly different approaches how to possibly use carbon markets or international credits. Sweden is rather advanced. Norway is also advancing. Finland has indicated in the current government's program that this issue will be assessed in the near future. So they are really clear targets for the Nordic countries, and we think that carbon markets could play a role to achieve these targets to some extent. Of course, the own emission reductions are the key, but to supplement these own activities. Next one, please. Yes, we've been sort of following the Paris Agreement development, Article 6 development. We have this PG group discussing the issues. We really want to seek synergies between the various ongoing activities, so definitely want to learn from each other, and we have this very lively dialogue within the Nordic colleagues. And sort of the key aim is to really try to develop a pilot activity for Article 6. We have quite a few workshops, side events. We really have to keep the discussion alive when things were kind of progressing slowly in the past few years. But now we see kind of real interest in this finally. And aiming for the piloting. And the last slide, please. Also, Nefco, because Nefco is only financing climate and environment projects, and we have a clear mandate from Nefco's board also to continue to work on carbon markets. And currently we are working with our consultants, especially in Uganda, and also we are working on sort of more general framework, taking into account all the Nordic priorities for possible Article 6 pilots and scaling up. And also we want to highlight there are quite a few linkages with various Nordic and other initiatives, including the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa, where we see the possibilities possibly to combine climate finance with carbon finance. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Kari, for that introduction to explain what NICA is about and what we hope to achieve. Moving swiftly on, I'd like to now introduce Axel Mikkelova. Axel is the founding partner of Perspectives Climate Group, who've been organizing this event. So thank you to Perspectives for this. Axel, maybe you can just take us through some of the work that you've been doing with Nika in terms of technical support for developing the Article 6 framework. So please.
Yes, thank you very much, Ash, and we are really happy to support the initiative. So please bring the slides up. So once the slides up, I just wanted to say that, of course, the Nordic region has been a front runner in Article 6 matters, and we are really happy to support various of those. Next slide, please. So we look into the 2 initiatives that were mentioned by Kari. Next, please. Next. So with regard to the Uganda piloting, there has been a pilot design study that was done late in 2020. Of course, we were suffering a bit from the pandemic, but Uganda has always been a front runner in market mechanisms. Uganda played an important role in the clean development mechanism, and it's institutionally quite well developed. And therefore, Uganda is a nice place in which one can build upon this experience to do Article 6 piloting. So one key activity was to clearly identify which are the relevant stakeholders. Of course, under the CDM we had stakeholders, but some of these stakeholders were a bit chilled by the reduction of the price of the CDM credits and the problems that the market faced in the last decade. So now, of course, we need to rebuild trust that the new market is actually really having a long-term perspective, and that it is also leading to an upscaling of mitigation. And to show that it's not just about some fluffy ideas, we are elaborating 2 mitigation activity idea notes, mains. This is now the format within which specific proposals for mitigation action that eventually leads to an Article 6 transaction will be done. And the 2 fields in which those mitigation activity idea notes or mains are developed, first one's rural electrification, but to be innovative, not focusing on households, but productive uses of energy. Because very frequently in the past, these initiatives were focusing on very small scale action and didn't really lead to development on the ground. And the second initiative relates to transport. Transport, of course, has been a conundrum for greenhouse gas mitigation, especially in African countries, and we want to look into innovative forms of e-mobility. Next slide, please. So we first, in our initial step, look at the Ugandan willingness and readiness for Article 6 cooperation. Where are there gaps that would have to be closed? Where do we already have the relevant capacity? As I said, from CDM times, there is significant capacity available in the country. The second step relates to developing key building blocks for the potential pilot activities. So to understand what is there in the pipeline within Uganda, and from that pipeline choose something which is really innovative and leading to these 2 mains. Next slide, please. So with regard to the first main, we look into solar mini grids that lead to small scale industrial engagement in rural areas. Of course, rural areas have agricultural production, and often there is a challenge that this agricultural production is for subsistence purposes only. We want to enable processing that can then lead to wider markets for the agricultural products. We also, of course, want to engage for irrigation in arid areas, so those where there's water constraint. And also we would have, often small businesses in rural areas that relate to simple services like food preparation. So we want to give the opportunity for these small service sectors that hopefully then will lead to larger income generation activities. The second one is very specific to Eastern Africa, because Eastern Africa has there is only few formal public transport options. There are some cities like Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, that have a bus system, but mostly you have minibuses or motorcycles that serve as public transport. And we want to look into electric two-wheelers as a means that is generating a lot of local benefits in the congested cities in terms of air pollution, and also, of course, greenhouse gas reduction benefits. So this is really a disruptive attempt. We don't know whether it will fly, but Article 6 is to increase ambition, is to generate transformation, and therefore this second one is really an initiative which I find extremely interesting. Next slide, please. So the second element relates to the framework that was mentioned by Kari. Next, please. So in the context of this framework, we collaborate with 2 other companies, that's Carbon Limits and it's Atlas. Atlas are legal specialists. Carbon Limits are Norwegian specialists on carbon markets. So, of course, for the first task, Carbon Limits plays an important role in identifying the key Nordic priorities. The second task then develops the initial broader framework, and we will especially look into environment integrity, the contribution to sustainable development, transformational change, I already mentioned it in the context of electric mobility, and then the attribution of the emission reductions, because often these activities have various sources of finance. only a part of the funding is coming from the revenues of the sale of the ITMOs, the carbon credits. And therefore, we need to understand, how do we avoid double claiming of the emission reductions? The third aspect relates then to development of the documents and templates that we need for such Article 6 transactions. And then the fourth task relates to how can we identify the most appropriate host countries where this framework can actually be implemented. Next slide, please. So what are the critical components of such a framework? Fortunately, Nordic countries are frontrunners, as I said. They have been very early in signing the so-called San Jose principles for high integrity carbon markets. So it's clear they want credits that are leading to higher ambition, that are additional, that don't lead to deterioration of development conditions in the countries. So what this means, we need a robust approach to baseline setting. We have been working in the past with the Swedish Energy Agency on certain baseline setting approaches for Article 6 piloting, so we are deeply involved in these aspects. Similar questions relating to additionality testing, especially in the context of NDCs that are not really ambitious, and the transformational change. Double counting I already mentioned, blending, and then of course how to ensure the monitoring, reporting and verification of sustainable development impacts is done properly. And then last but not least, because a lot of, let's say, the basic infrastructure for Article 6 is now being built, how to have a common Nordic reporting platform and how to harmonize capacity building. In the past with CDM, we saw many donors converging on certain fashionable countries to do the same things in terms of capacity building. It even led to people now not doing their work properly, but going to one workshop every day to collect the so-called daily subsistence allowance. So one needs to be careful how to organize the capacity building. Next, please. So with regard to the documentation, so I already mentioned the main, let's say the first step of the documentation, but of course this is only, let's say, giving a rough overview of what one is planning. Eventually, before really getting a contract for sale of ITMOs, one needs a bigger document, the so-called MAD. That's at least the term that's coming in. I hope it's not the wrong terminology because it may give some strange connotation, but mitigation activity design document. Those of you who have worked on CDM know the project design document. That's really very specific documentation, and for the MADs it will be similar. Then, of course, some templates for the bilateral agreement, the umbrella that actually guides the transaction. We've seen that, for example, the Swiss have recently concluded various bilateral agreements. We've seen the first Australian bilateral agreement just, I think, yesterday at this COP with Fiji. So bilateral agreements are starting to come up, and of course, we want to learn also from past lessons. Then the legal fine print, what is now starting to be called MOPA, the Mitigation Outcome Purchase Agreement, so prices, conditions. And then also templates for the letters of authorization by the host country governments. And on the last task, as I mentioned, to understand which are countries that are appropriate for doing all this. So this should be a global effort, so we want to look into various geographic areas, and also to involve countries with different status of development. So we have not yet been deciding which countries to choose, but our process is ongoing. Next, please. So with that, I would like to close, and I'm looking forward also, of course, to Bianca from East Africa, who is giving the earthing on the ground, and I'm looking forward to our discussion later today. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Axel, for your wisdom there. I think it's very interesting to see how things are developing on the ground, and we're very pleased to be working with perspectives on this important work. So our next speaker is Bianca Gichangi. She is the coordinator of the East African Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance, so a very appropriate person to speak to next. She's responsible for the management of the Alliance's activities, focusing on enhancing capacity on carbon market activities and the development of the Alliance in the region. So over to you, Bianca, if you could give us a perspective from the East African perspective, please.
Thank you, Ash, and thank you for having me today. I'm really happy to be here to speak on behalf of the Alliance. So I will give a brief background for everyone to know the Eastern Africa Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance has 7 member countries. And this is Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi. But as a whole, the aim of the Alliance really is to ensure that there is long-term participation in carbon market activities. And this centers around 3 objective areas, which is enhancing the capacity for readiness for Article 6, ensuring well-coordinated negotiators attending the negotiation sessions at the UNFCCC, like COP and the SB sessions, as well as regional collaboration. And I'll go through each of them, elaborating a bit more on what we've been doing in those specific areas. So in terms of enhancing capacity, before I go into the specific details, there needs to be a bit of a background and understanding of what has been happening on the ground, because Eastern Africa has had some carbon market activity under the Kyoto Protocol and the CDM. There have been over 400 projects registered, versions of project activities and programs of activities. And we've seen, particularly for Eastern Africa, programs of activities have been quite successful, with more than half of them being POAs, and they have received more issuance. And this is also in the area of energy. So we've seen a lot of activity in generation and in energy access as well. And while Africa was late to the CDM party and registered projects a bit late, the POAs did come in a bit later, and we've seen they've actually contributed quite a bit to the region. So that just lays a bit of a foundation to show that there is a presence, at least of a private sector on the ground. And one of the activities that the Alliance does is work with different stakeholders, and primarily we've been working with private sector and government. And what we found is that existing project developers are really keen to understand how Article 6 is going to affect them and what it's going to mean for new projects moving forward. So what we do is we have private sector workshops and dialogues that bring together existing and aspiring project developers. We do brief them on what's happening in the negotiations in Article 6, but we also noticed that there's a very strong voluntary carbon market presence, so we do keep them up to date on the developments in those aspects as well. And there's a lot of sharing of experiences, and what we've seen recently is also, even though we had success in different sectors like energy last time, there's emerging areas like transport. So there's a lot that the project developers are keen to start working on moving forward in terms of carbon markets. So that's just one area we deal with, making sure that the stakeholders are up to date. But in terms of actual Article 6 readiness, we have seen very practical requests coming from the countries. For example, in the area of corresponding adjustments, often seen as a difficult area in Article 6, but it's related to avoiding double counting. And the countries are really keen on making sure that they can take part in Article 6, but with robust accounting. And because there was a lot of uncertainty as to how this actually operates and how this works, and we know that there's no decision yet, there still was a real interest to understand how this works. So we had a workshop where we took participants from the different governments through a template for corresponding adjustments. There was a whole discussion on the different methods, understanding how it would be done. Of course, feedback was taken. It's a very complex process. This was just the beginning, but it is showing that there's a keen interest to be ready for Article 6 should we get a decision, and to roll out after that. And our primary focus is usually government and private sector, but we definitely want to expand to other stakeholders. And a recent request that we saw that was also quite interesting was one that came on doing a capacity building workshop on carbon markets, but particularly for youth and young professionals. And how this is important is because they are, aside from understanding how carbon markets work, they're really keen to understand where the career opportunities would be. So there's a lot of demand that will be coming in for this project, so how can they plug in? As we know, in Africa, there's a lot of young people who require jobs, and there is potential in this area. There is potential for auditors, there's potential for consultants, and all this as a whole will actually reduce transaction costs, because we know that verification is expensive, so having local verifiers, DOEs, will really be important. So the more we get this message out and the countries can come up with structured programs, the better it would be. But we've definitely seen there's already a keen interest in this. And another area is we do carbon pricing generally. So one of the activities we've had this year that had a lot of interest and participation actually from members from East and West Africa was on a course that we did on carbon taxation, preparing African countries for carbon taxation. And this course was in collaboration with many institutions. So the RCC, Kampala, Lome, they did help in contributing to the technical aspects, but we worked on it with consultants and the World Bank. And all this information is actually online. It was an online course that we worked with St. George's University to help us use their platform to put it on there. And the good thing about this particular course was that it was very Africa-centric, very particular to the needs of African countries. And each module actually had an African expert from the different African countries that have already started engaging in this process in some form or other, contributing to the learning and the experiences. So it was really engaging for the participants to actually interact with these experts and to ask all their questions in these different aspects. So in one aspect, it's a very long process to come up with a carbon tax, but it's important for them to understand all the design aspects, and all this information is available online. So in terms of capacity building, it's been around training, workshops, but also knowledge products. And also just in that background where I was giving about the projects, it was that the Alliance, with support from the Climate Finance Innovators, had carbon project profiles developed for each of the countries and a regional profile compiled, just to make it easy for people to know what has actually been happening on the ground. Of course, this will be updated. Should we see a lot of activity, then we can really analyze and track the progress moving forward. As we now get into Article 6 as well. So moving now also into the aspect of negotiations, which is very important. It's really important to have a say at the COPs and how these mechanisms are being designed. So we support the negotiators through training them before the sessions on the crunch issues, the difficult issues around the different aspects of Article 6. And this has been an ongoing activity actually for the past couple of years. It's become one of our main activities. And what we're seeing now is actually strong national teams coming up. So there's also support for national coordination. And what that does is it really strengthens the position when these countries contribute to the AGN strategy. So the bottom-up solutions are really helpful. Sometimes it's really good to have a strong national position, then it can influence the regional position. And we are seeing that they are getting very coordinated nationally on these very, very difficult topics. And that's because you have to involve other stakeholders from different ministries who will be involved in the implementation later on. So that's one of the areas that we're seeing is definitely improving as we're moving forward. And we also did a handbook that outlines the key issues on this area, which, because it's, as we know, Article 6 can be quite technical. It has a lot of intricate issues which you have to be able to explain easily. And what we've seen is that this handbook explains these issues, but it also explains to them how the negotiation works, elaborates a bit more on the language that would be good for them to use when they're communicating their ideas moving forward. So this has also been translated into Spanish and is actually available on our website, and will be translated into French soon as well. And I think just to mention on regional collaboration, as I mentioned, the Alliance is about 2 years now, but we do take a lot of inspiration from the West African Alliance. So we find that learning from West Africa does give good case studies that we can work on as well in Eastern Africa. So for example, when we're doing the corresponding adjustment training, we did have case studies from Senegal who have gone ahead and signed bilaterals with Switzerland. So just to understand what other countries are thinking about in this regard and doing these things practically. So it's really a good peer-to-peer exchange way of learning how to deal with Article 6. And then on top of all this, I think lastly, I'll just wrap up with saying that it's important to understand the institutional and infrastructure readiness for Article 6. So we did do an assessment for each of the countries to understand what they would need to be ready for Article 6. So there are recommendations that have been provided in terms of institutional setup, in terms of the roles that the institutions will need to take up, in what capacity they'll need people to be doing certain activities, and then also in regard to infrastructure, it was assessed, and the legal framework first and foremost is that there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of setting up a legal policies and frameworks within the countries. That's one of the areas where a lot of work is required. But in terms of infrastructure, we have, because the projects are not so many at first, we can always start with interim registries and then work on building on bigger infrastructures. But of course, the capacity needs, we can detail that a lot more, and in terms of implementing, it will be quite a bit. But on the ground, the Alliance has been working in terms of readiness and is really looking forward to scale up on a lot of these issues moving forward into Article 6. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Bianca, for your contribution. I think you've outlined a very comprehensive approach that's being taken by the Alliance in terms of developing and building capacity. Some of the takeaways from that, at least I'd like to note, is first of all the willingness of governments in the region to harness the power of the market, to engage in that activity, and also the willingness of the private sector to engage in these opportunities. And thank you also for bringing up the youth perspective, which is also very, very interesting and very important going forwards. Okay, now one thing I would just say at this point is that if you do have any questions to our speakers, please do raise them. I believe there's an opportunity to do so in the YouTube chat. You have to register, but we have received some questions already, and we'll hopefully try to take these forwards at the end of this discussion. Regrettably, we've been informed that Bob Natifu, who is the Commissioner at the Ministry of Water and Environment in Uganda, is unable to attend and participate in this workshop. I think it would have been a wonderful opportunity. He could have provided some of the country context, but I think Bianca, you did a very good job in setting out the stall in terms of the activities that are happening in East Africa more generally. And whilst we regret that Bob is not able to join us, possibly if there are questions, you could try and take part in that discussion later on. So thanks again, Bianca. So then I propose that we move directly to our final speaker. So I'd like to introduce Arvid Rönnberg, who is from the Swedish Energy Agency. He's a program manager in the International Climate Cooperation unit. So he's working with his colleagues on establishing a portfolio of bilateral cooperation programs under the Article 6, and Sweden's a trailblazer in this area. And I think we'd be very keen to hear from you, Arvid, in terms of the insights and any sort of lessons that you've learned from your pilot activities. So please, Arvid, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Ash. Hello, everyone. Thank you to Perspectives for inviting me to speak here today, and thank you to all the previous speakers for a very interesting webinar so far. As Ash stated, my name is Arvid Rönnberg, and I work at the Swedish Energy Agency with the development of our portfolio of bilateral cooperation on Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Could you put up the slides on the screen, please? Yeah, we can go to the next one straight away. Perfect. So to provide some background, the Swedish Energy Agency work on behalf of the government of Sweden to lead the Swedish transition to a sustainable energy system. And we do this through the identification and support of research, supporting the development of innovative technological solutions, and by disseminating the achieved knowledge and lessons learned. We also participate in international collaboration and have been engaged in the development of carbon markets for almost 20 years. And since 2018, we have been exploring approaches of how Article 6 of the Paris Agreement can be implemented in order to support countries in their ambition raising. As a part of this exploration, we are in dialogue with several different actors among those perspectives within this field, as well as several potential host countries discussing how to develop bilateral cooperation. And we will be signing our first memorandum of understanding together with Ghana, next week here at COP26. A very important step for the continued development of our understanding and capacity in this area. Another way we have been putting the ambition of the Paris Agreement into practice is by working on designing actual mitigation activities suitable for implementation in Article 6. And together with 5 different actors and 5 different countries, we have been working on developing mitigation activity design documents that Axel mentioned before to understand the details of the process. Hopefully, we will be able to start the development of our first real Article 6 activity soon. And through this work, we have collected some lessons learned that I was asked to share with you today. So next slide, please. Great. To begin, I would like to mention that this is still a market in development, and many concepts are still largely unexplored or not sufficiently put into a relevant context. As such, a large part of our work has been directed at identifying and addressing conceptual barriers and provide definitions or guidance for how they should or could be considered in relation to Article 6. We have funded reports and research looking at concepts such as additionality, NDC design, baseline design, environmental integrity, etc., in the light of Article 6, which you can access through our website. I'll tell you later the link. Through our exploration and our work with putting this into practice, we have encountered challenges that are categorized into 2 overall blocks: host country relation and activity design. Next slide, please. Great. To create mitigation activities that result in long-lasting effect and reduce emissions, it is important to have a close cooperation between the participating parties to make sure that all necessary aspects are sufficiently considered. But since Article 6 cooperation is still in early development, relevant political infrastructure has not yet been established in most countries, and as such, it can be hard to identify exactly what agencies or institutions are actually mandated in necessary areas. This is a challenge also for our sake and something we are looking at how to resolve. It may also be that mandates that are required can be distributed between agencies, which require additional internal coordination, a challenge in an already sufficiently complex area. Therefore, it is important to early identify capacity needs, as this may not only be something that Article 6 cooperation includes, but may also be a prerequisite to cooperation. And some general areas that we have identified as important for capacity development are NDC design, the monitoring and reporting of capacity, capacity to monitor and report rather, as well as political infrastructure related to approval and authorizations. Another important lesson is the value of having a clear understanding of policies and access to accurate data, both on sectorial and local level. To design activities while keeping environmental integrity high and make sure that they can be transformative, a very good understanding of the challenges and possibilities in the context of the host country is required. And the perspective of those affected is crucial if sustainable development is to be properly considered. And this means that stakeholder interaction on multiple levels is a must, and some sort of local expertise or familiarity is very valuable. And this understanding will also be necessary to properly align to NDCs and policies, etc., that are already hard to understand even without access to some sort of proper interpreter from the host country side. So to summarize, this means there's a close and transparent relation between the cooperating parties will be especially crucial in this early development phase until the framework for how cooperation should work has been more clearly defined. Next slide, please. So looking at activity design, we have faced some different challenges that are partly connected to the previous slide. It is important that activities on Article 6 keep to the highest level of quality if we want them to tick all of the boxes and accelerate the transition to sustainability on a global scale. And as such, I want to start with mentioning the importance as well as the challenge of being conservative in the establishment of a baseline when calculating estimated mitigation outcomes. In order to ensure environmental integrity, we must be certain that we do not overestimate or simplify the design too much. And this can make it complex and time-consuming to properly set a baseline, but it's especially important at this early stage. And to counteract uncertainties regarding data and policies in the host country, worst-case scenarios can be necessary to consider when the projection of relevant parameters is performed. And this can, as a result, negatively affect the overall estimated impact of the activity, but it is important to remember that in reality, benefits will simply shift to host country and ex-post reporting will partly remedy this underestimation. Also, as our experience with Article 6 activities increase, so will our certainty regarding activity impact. Next, as we work on meeting the goals of and raising ambition within our NDCs, mitigation activities must be ambitious enough to be additional throughout the crediting period of the activity. And to be clear, one of the benefits of Article 6 is to raise the baseline of the host country. But if we are not ambitious enough, it is possible that the continued additionality of activities competes with ambition raising. As an extension of this, in order to not compete with raised ambition of NDCs, the lifetime projects do not have to match the crediting period, but can be designed with the NDC cycles in mind. But this means, however, that either the part of the lifetime not to be credited will have to be financed during the crediting period, or additional finance after the crediting period for the remaining lifetime must be secured. And while on the topic of finance, another challenge is the upfront financing of activities. It makes sense that result-based payments can prove challenging in a developing market, and methods for countering this will be necessary, at least in the early stage of development. And finally, since the development of activities require cooperation between several parties, it is important to establish the distribution of responsibility regarding the design of activities and data collection early, since this might not be clear and may differ between cases. Next slide, please. So to conclude, I would like to summarize this from a different perspective. Cooperation under Article 6 should aim to be transformative and accelerate the global transition to sustainability while improving the lives of individuals and safeguarding the environment. And this requires activities to be ambitious, consider the development of climate policy, and be designed for scalability. Environmental integrity is crucial and requires the consideration of both financial and political additionality, which translates into stringent baselines. However, since we may not have all the data necessary, assumptions will be required, and we must be transparent as well as keep our estimations conservative to minimize the impact of uncertainties. And to close, I would like to highlight the importance of sustainable development, which should be integrated in Article 6 cooperation and be designed to foster real and lasting change, both considering social, financial, and environmental aspects. And to do so, it is important to establish ways to track and quantify the impact of sustainable development activities, as well as identify safeguards. Next slide, please. And with that, I would like to thank you all for listening. Thank you once again for providing me with the opportunity to speak here. And if you have any questions, you may contact me or any of my colleagues here at the Swedish Energy Agency. And I don't think you have the presentation anymore, but you would otherwise be able to see the link to our website on the screen. But I could send it out if you want to. Thank you very much. There we go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Arvid, for that. And first of all, congratulations with your new agreement with Ghana. It's very important to see these things are moving ahead. Maybe if I could just take the opportunity while you're here, just to say, first of all, I'm aware that the Swedish Energy Agency was a very much an early actor with the Clean Development Mechanism, was very much a pioneer almost 20 years ago, working to build the CDM in Africa. My question to you really is, in terms of how does the agency see the opportunities for building on existing experiences? We heard earlier on that the party came late to Africa, but in the end, you saw the growth of POAs and so forth. What sort of opportunities can you see here for transitioning some of these projects?
So our experience with activities from the Kyoto Protocol area obviously provide a good base when designing new activities under Article 6. And we still have the experience as the agency responsible for these projects and to administrate those, which provides an understanding for how things has been done previously. And we'll also have some experience of what we want to avoid regarding previous activities now that we move into Article 6 era. And of course, we should not squander that knowledge, but we have to be clear that this is a very different concept from how things have been done previously. So I'd say be prepared to kill your darlings, but I mean, still use the knowledge wisely that you have earned through this cooperation so far.
Okay, thank you for that. We have a question from Felix from Cameroon. He is asking whether Nika has any plans to work in the Congo Basin countries. Unfortunately, we don't at the moment, Felix, but we are looking at possible country opportunities, and those will be outlined in the future. Okay, so maybe if I don't see any other questions right now, but maybe if I could turn to the first question would be to Axel. Are you still there, Axel?
Yeah.
Ah, you're there. Okay, thank you. We're all there. That's great. Okay, Axel. In terms of your expectations from this COP, what, from a technical perspective, as relates to the implementation framework that you're working on with Nika, what sort of challenges do you see, and what sort of impacts could further develop the implementation of an initiative like Nika, taking into account some of the activities that have been highlighted from the Swedish side, and also we're aware of the Swiss being very active in this area. What are your expectations from COP?
Well, we have seen quite a positive movement that countries have been rallying behind the call for a capacity building program. So there has been a new Article 6 text out yesterday, and this text, both in the context of Article 6.2, so the bilateral cooperative approaches, as well in the context of Article 6.4, the internationally determined rules for a mechanism similar to CDM, both now have text on that capacity building is needed, particularly on the context of institution building. And there was no country that was saying, no, we don't want to talk about capacity building. And of course, Nika perfectly fits into this capacity building paradigm. So I would hope if we manage to get an Article 6 text, it will have for both components of Article 6 capacity building, which are very nice elements to anchor Nika in.
Okay, thank you, Axel. And maybe a quick follow-up on that. I'm just wondering, what's your view? What happens if there is no definitive agreement at COP? Will the show go on?
Well, the show will go on with regard to piloting Article 6.2 style. Of course, we still have this famous paragraph 77D of the decision 18 CMA1 on transparency. Of course, there's a number of countries that says it should not prejudice the outcome of Article 6 negotiations, but it's always a fallback option. So I would think that the show can go on, but of course the question of demand, prices, this will be chilled if we have another failure, because, well, normally you have 3 shots at one thing, now it's the 3rd shot time, and I hope that the UK as party and presidency really engaged in carbon market activities is pulling this together.
Great, thank you. And yeah, it's very interesting also to consider the market perspective here. And I think you're right. The market has been waiting for some time, and we need the right signals. Maybe if I turn to Bianca. Bianca, I was just wondering, really, in terms of, I mean, unfortunately, we couldn't have colleagues from Uganda joining us today, but I was just wondering whether you could comment whether there's consensus amongst some of the countries that you're working with in the alliance on some of the key issues which are relevant, as was mentioned, the San Jose principles, for environmental integrity. And I know that some of this is, for particularly for some of the countries, it's very complex. There's a lot of important issues that need to be unpacked here. For example, the corresponding adjustments, and what does this mean for them? What's your view on this, and how countries are dealing with this at the moment?
Well, okay, I can't speak on behalf of a specific country, but I can speak generally. So, as I mentioned earlier, they are very keen on ensuring that if Article 6 is used, that it's done with robust accounting. So there's a general understanding that we have to make sure there's transparency, which is why there's a real interest in understanding how this would work. And parties have agreed generally in the decisions beforehand that corresponding adjustments would be used. So we understand there's a lot of debate around it and not a final decision, but there definitely is a general understanding that it needs to be robust, it needs to be transparent, and that environmental integrity is key. So regarding issues around that, we know that with baselines, and it's definitely important. The details, however, will come as hopefully if we get more work in the program that we will be working on later, but these are generally principles that are viewed as really important, because we have to make sure that we're not double counting. We have to make sure that everything is transparent, and at the end of the day, it needs to actually be contributing to ambition in the 1.5 goal. So generally, I would say that this is something that there's no outright opposition, but there is an understanding of how to do it that with a certainty that's required from them to know how to apply this, which is why we're really hoping that there's a good outcome at COP26. But generally, these are very important principles, and most of the countries definitely want robust accounting.
Okay, thank you, Bianca. And as always, the devil is in the detail. And but it does help, of course, that the countries are cognizant and willing to work with these issues. And I'm always encouraged by the fact that so many of the African countries have included market pricing and the carbon market in their NDC targets. Okay, so maybe if I can address a question, and I'm being asked to close the event slightly early, but if I can just ask my colleague Kari to take a question. Kari, how do you address the potential scrutiny by civil society and research actors on these issues, particularly around environmental integrity and social integrity?
Thank you, As. This is a very crucial question, and I guess Article 6 is really beyond CDM. We would really need to communicate that this is more than CDM. But I mean, at the same time, I think we players with long history, I mean, we should have kind of indicated the positive outcome of CDM a bit more, including the major financial flows. So I think those are crucial. But I mean, definitely it's like beyond CDM, there's ambition, finance, no double counting, sustainable development, gender. All these issues need to be communicated, and this is not done yet. It's sort of possibly our duty to do this as well now. Thank you, Ash, for the great question.
Okay, thanks, Kari. I think that you've summarized things quite nicely. I think we see that the clean development mechanism sort of laid the foundations for the market here in Africa, and we're looking at real opportunities to build on some of these experiences. There's a lot of experience around the table here in today's session. It's regrettable that Uganda wasn't able to join us today, but I think we had a very good perspective from Bianca, who's working with a number of countries in the alliance. We've seen a lot of very strong messages coming through from governments, also from the private sector. We've heard about the perspectives on youth as well. We see there's a lot of sustainable development benefits to be had, but of course we are in a situation where we need to have stronger signals, both from the COP and from the rule book that will follow. So I think that there are great opportunities. We certainly at Nefco see that there are many great opportunities of working in East Africa. We see great opportunities for linking climate finance and carbon markets also. So we're very hopeful that things can progress. And with that, I'd like to conclude this side event, to thank our speakers, to thank our organizers' perspectives, and to thank everyone who's been able to join in. Thank you for your patience and perseverance, and we hope that you'll have an enjoyable and instructive and ultimately successful COP26. Thank you.